No benefits, no claims. He's a fake vet. My dad testified against me. His lawyer nodded as if that proved everything. No further questions. The judge cleared his throat to speak, but a voice interrupted. Please. Just a moment. The room went silent. I felt the blood drain from my face, a cold sweat breaking out on the back of my neck. My father's voice still echoed in my ears. It was the most hurtful thing he'd ever said to me. And there I was, sitting in the witness stand, waiting for the judge to acknowledge the interruption. The tension in the courtroom was thick, palpable. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. I could feel the weight of the moment, my hands gripping to the witness stand, so hard my knuckles turned white. It felt like the floor had shifted beneath me, as if the very ground I stood on was trying to swallow me whole. The room wasn't large, but it felt too small for what was happening. The walls, a dull shade of beige, seemed to close in on me. The sound of the gavel hitting the bench was sharp and quick, a reminder of just how real everything had become. My father was trying to strip away everything that I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed. And there, sitting in the same room, was my mother's death, the estate, and the part of me that had spent years trying to move on from a family that had never understood me. As the courtroom's focus shifted to the man who had interrupted, I tried to steady myself. The voice was familiar. Not someone I had seen in a while, but someone who had been a part of my life when it mattered most. During my time in the Navy, Chief Petty Officer Samuel Hart. I didn't know what he was doing here. Why was he here, at this moment? I hadn't seen him since my last duty station almost 4 years ago. He stepped into the light, tall, solid, with that military posture I would have recognized anywhere. Even in civilian clothes, there was no mistaking the authority in his presence. His eyes met mine briefly, not warm, not cold, just steady. The way he always looked at me when I needed reassurance. It was then that I realized. Somehow, this was happening for me. The judge raised his hand in the air, halting any further distractions. Sir, please identify yourself. The judge said, his voice calm but authoritative. Samuel Hart, the man said without hesitation. Retired United States Navy Chief Petty Officer. Service number available on request. I couldn't help the flicker of hope that started to form inside me. The judge adjusted his glasses and motioned for him to proceed. Chief Hart continued, his voice firm but with the same tone I remembered. I served directly with Ms. Miller. I can confirm her service, her record, and the events referenced in her personnel file. My father scoffed loudly. Oh, come on. His voice dripped with the same bitterness that had marked every conversation we'd ever had about my service. He hated it, hated the fact that I had done something he never could. The judge raised a hand sharply. Mr. Miller, be quiet. I could feel the tension in the room shift. A quiet ripple of disbelief running through the other people present. Even the lawyer who had been so confident in his case now seemed uncertain. This wasn't the way the day was supposed to unfold. Chief Hart didn't flinch though. He stood tall, unwavering. I also have documentation to support my testimony, he added, reaching into a plain brown envelope. The envelope was familiar, the same kind I had seen only moments before when my lawyer had handed over my own documents. My heart raced as he carefully placed the papers on the judge's desk. The documents were weighty, thicker than anything I had been able to provide, and I couldn't help but feel the first glimmer of hope. My father's lawyer was already shifting in his seat, trying to hold on to some semblance of confidence. Your Honor, this is highly irregular, the lawyer sputtered. This witness is unlisted. The judge didn't hesitate. This is a bench trial, counsel. I may admit testimony I deem relevant. Sit down. While for the first time in the morning, the smug grin vanished from my father's lawyer's face. The air in the courtroom was thick, heavy with expectation. This was the moment. The chief moved toward the witness stand, and I heard the soft shuffle of his boots against the floor, the same steady rhythm I had known so well. As he sat down, I found myself holding my breath, unsure of what would happen next. I knew what this moment meant, and I knew that I wasn't alone anymore. After the courtroom quieted, Chief Hart gave his testimony. His words were direct and honest, one cutting through the thick tension that had built up over the past hour. My father's lawyer barely spoke again, and the judge's attention was entirely focused on the papers Chief Hart had brought, the proof of my service. My father, on the other hand, had shrunk back into his chair, his face twisted with frustration. But it wasn't over yet. The gavel came down, marking the moment when the case was dismissed. The judge's voice was firm. The veteran status of Miss Miller stands. The claim brought by Mr. Miller is dismissed. I felt a wave of relief flood through me, but it was fleeting. It was impossible to ignore the empty space that lingered between me and my father. The trial had ended, but the heart of the matter was still unresolved. My father hadn't looked at me since the testimony began, and he certainly wasn't going to look at me now. I could feel the weight of the silence settle over us as people shuffled in their seats. The case concluded, but not the conflict. I stayed seated for a moment longer than I should have. I felt disconnected, like a stranger in my own skin. I'd won, but the victory didn't feel like one. My dad's betrayal was too fresh, too deep. The thought of returning home to face him was unbearable. When I finally left the courtroom, I was already dreading the drive. I didn't even know what to say to my father. There were no words that could undo the damage. As I walked out into the bright sunlight, I shielded my eyes from the glaring light, but it did little to shake the haze in my mind. My body was exhausted, but my mind was too full to rest. I wasn't sure where to go next. Part of me thought about just driving, getting away for a while. But I knew that running wouldn't change anything. I stopped at a diner, the kind of place where the neon sign buzzed louder than it glowed. It had been my mother's favorite place, and I found myself here, not because I needed food, but because it was the one place that felt familiar. I ordered a coffee, black, no sugar, though I barely touched it. The steam rising from the cup mirrored the confusion swirling in my mind. It should have been enough to win in court. I should have felt triumphant, like I had earned something. But all I felt was emptiness. My dad had been so sure of himself. He had used everything he could to tear me down, to make me small, to make me question everything I'd been through. And now I was the one left wondering if he would ever see me as more than a disappointment. I sipped the coffee and watched the world move slowly outside the diner window. But the thoughts that ran through my head were anything but slow. The words he had said to me in court, about me being a fake, still echoed in my mind, louder than anything else. How could a father do that to his own child? I tried to push the anger down, but it rose up in me again. And then the realization hit me with a force that took my breath away. He had been the one person in my life I could never fully break free from. It wasn't just about the benefits or the military service. It was about how I had always craved his approval, even when I told myself I didn't. The pain of that need for approval, the way he had turned his back on me when I needed him most, was sharper than anything I had ever faced in combat. Even now it felt like the hardest battle I had ever fought, but there were no medals waiting for me. No cheering crowds. No victory. I let my eyes wander back to the cup in front of me. The familiar ache in my chest didn't go away. I hadn't expected it to, but a small part of me had hoped that maybe, just maybe, there could be some kind of healing after today. But the truth was, no matter what the judge ruled, it wasn't going to erase the years of hurt. It wasn't going to change the fact that I had fought for my place, not just in the Navy, but in my family. I stayed in the diner long after my coffee went cold. My thoughts cycled through the same questions, the same hurt, as if I was searching for something I couldn't name. I had a right to feel angry. I had a right to want more from my father. But what did that even mean now? When I finally left, I didn't go back to my father's house. I didn't even drive home. I just kept driving, my hands gripping the wheel tight, and wondered how long it would take for me to find a way back to myself. Because even after the judge's ruling, even after the courtroom drama, I realized the hardest part was still to come. The hardest part would always be dealing with the person I had always wanted to make proud. And for the first time, I wasn't sure it was ever going to happen. The next morning, I didn't feel like going anywhere. I stayed in my apartment sitting by the window, staring at the empty street outside. The court case had been resolved, but the mess that lingered after it felt like it was only just beginning. My father's words, his accusation that I was a fake, still echoed in my head. I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that had settled deep in my chest. And the truth was, I didn't know how to move forward. It wasn't just the court case. It was everything that led up to it. The years of trying to prove myself to a father who would never see me for who I was. I joined the Navy at 18, not just to serve, but to escape, to build something for myself that didn't rely on the expectations of my family. The Navy had given me structure, purpose, and a sense of pride that I never found at home. But when I came back, after all I'd given, all I had hoped for was a simple acknowledgement from my father. Maybe a welcome home. Maybe just something that said, I'm proud of you. But instead, all I got was that crushing silence. And now the courtroom had added one more layer of pain to it. I couldn't help but think about what had happened next, about Chief Hart. When he stood up in that courtroom and interrupted the proceedings, I wasn't sure what to think at first. I hadn't seen him in years, not since my last duty station. But there he was, standing tall, unwavering, and ready to testify on my behalf. He hadn't had to do that. No one had asked him to. He didn't owe me anything. Yet, he chose to stand up for me, and in doing so, he reminded me of everything I had learned during my time in the service: honor, duty, and the unspoken bonds that exist between people who have served together. Chief Hart wasn't just a former superior. He was someone I respected, someone who had seen me at my best and my worst. He knew what I had gone through, and when he testified, it wasn't to simply win the case. It was to remind me of my own worth. He knew that my service wasn't a lie, and he knew that, despite everything, I deserved to be recognized for it. I thought back to the long nights in the barracks, the grueling training sessions, and the missions we had been on together. Chief Hart had always been there, steady and reliable, like a rock in the middle of a storm. He never gave empty praise, but when he did acknowledge my work, it meant something. It meant I had earned his respect. I never needed more than that. But in that moment, standing there in the courtroom, it was clear that someone had been looking out for me. Someone still believed in me when my own family refused to. It was a small victory, but it was enough to lift me for a moment. It was a reminder that not everything was lost. There was still something worth fighting for, even if it wasn't the approval of the people I had always wanted it from. I spent the rest of the day pacing in my apartment, unsure of what to do next. I didn't want to go back to my father's house, not yet. But I couldn't stay here forever either. And then, just as I was about to leave, the phone rang. It was Jessica. "Hey," she said, her voice light but with an undercurrent of concern. "How are you holding up?" I thought about it for a moment before answering. "I'm okay. Just still processing everything." "You want to talk about it?" she asked. I hesitated. There was a part of me that wanted to tell her everything. The hurt, the anger, the confusion. But another part of me wanted to keep it all locked away. I'd done it for so long, maybe I could keep doing it. "I'm not sure I can talk about it yet," I finally said. "It feels too raw, you know." She paused. "I get it. Just know I'm here if you change your mind." "Thanks, Jessica. I appreciate it." We hung up, and for the first time that day, I felt a small sense of relief. It wasn't a solution, but it was something. She had always been there for me, ever since we met during my service. She understood what it meant to carry weight that others didn't see, to fight battles that weren't always visible. But even with that comfort, the silence after the call left me with the same questions. What did I do now? How did I go on? The court case was over, but I knew there was still more to face. More to understand about myself, about my family, and about the truth that had been hidden for so long. That night, I went for a drive. It wasn't much of a plan, but I needed to clear my head. The streets were quiet, the hum of the engine filling the space around me. I didn't have a destination in mind, but somehow, the motion of the car was soothing. As I drove, my mind wandered back to my father. I couldn't help but wonder how he was handling everything. Would he reach out? Would he even acknowledge me? Or would he continue to act like this didn't matter? I didn't know if I was ready for a conversation with him. I wasn't sure I was ready for anything with him. I didn't have answers, but I did have the knowledge that, at least for now, I wasn't alone, and that was enough to keep moving forward. The following day I received an unexpected call. It was my brother, Sean. He'd never been good at talking about feelings, especially not with me, but there was something in his voice that made me pick up. "Hey, you got a minute?" he asked, his voice tight. I didn't answer right away, unsure of what this was about. "What's going on?" I asked. He hesitated before speaking again. "Dad. He wants to talk to you." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to dismiss it, tell him I wasn't ready to face him. But there was a larger part of me. something I couldn't quite explain, that needed to know what was coming next. What had changed? When? Tonight. Can you come by? I didn't want to, but I said yes. I had to. The drive to my father's house was quieter than usual, the weight of everything pressing down on me. As I pulled up to the familiar old house, I couldn't help but notice how little had changed. The same faded paint on the front porch, the same lawn that hadn't seen a mower in weeks. But it wasn't the house that had changed. It was the relationship between the people inside. I rang the doorbell, and when it opened, Sean stood there, his expression unreadable. Without a word, he stepped aside, letting me in. Dad was sitting in his chair, the same worn recliner he'd always claimed as his gaze fixed on the TV but not really seeing it. I took a deep breath before stepping into the living room. "Hey, Dad," I said, trying to sound casual. But the words felt heavy, like they were caught in my throat. He didn't look at me immediately, but then his eyes flickered up, just for a moment, before he turned his attention back to the TV. "You came?" "I did," I said, walking a little closer. "Sean said you wanted to talk." He nodded, but still didn't look at me. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said, his voice gruff. "About everything." I didn't say anything. I just waited, my heart pounding in my chest. What was this about? Was he going to apologize? Or was this just another attempt to explain away everything he'd said and done? He cleared his throat, but it was softer than usual. I didn't mean what I said in court." For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. My father had never been one to apologize. Never. Not for anything. "Then what did you mean?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. He sighed, looking down at his hands. "I don't know. I couldn't stand the thought that you were better than me." I blinked, the words hitting me harder than I expected. "Better," I repeated. "Dad, I didn't do anything to try to make you feel bad." "I know," he said, his voice cracking. "But when you joined the Navy, I saw something in you that I couldn't handle. Something I failed to do, something I couldn't fix. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, but it always did. I was angry because you did what I couldn't. I was ashamed, and I thought if I could make you seem like a liar, it would make me feel better. Like I could pretend it never happened." I stood frozen for a long moment, processing his words. My father, the man who had never shown a hint of vulnerability, was admitting to the very thing I'd always suspected but never dared to voice. Shame. Fear. Insecurity. He hadn't been rejecting me. He'd been rejecting his own failure. "Why didn't you just tell me that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you just tell me you were scared?" He wiped his eyes with his sleeve, his voice soft now, raw. "I didn't know how. I've never been good at showing that kind of thing. Hell, I'd even know how to tell your mother. She knew, of course, but she was always better at understanding these things. I just kept it inside." I stood there, trying to reconcile the man I had feared and resented for so many years with the man sitting in front of me now, broken and fragile. "It wasn't about me, was it? It was about you." Dad looked up at me then, his eyes filled with something I hadn't seen before. "Yeah, it was. And I'm sorry. I've been so damn proud of what I did, what I built, and when you came back, I just couldn't handle that you had done something I never could." I couldn't find the words to say. I wanted to scream, to tell him that he didn't need to feel threatened by me, that I hadn't done anything to compete with him. But the hurt was there, still raw, and it made it hard to speak. Instead, I just sat down, opposite him, and let the silence sit between us. After what felt like an eternity, he spoke again. "I'm not proud of what I did to you. I was wrong. And I want to make it right." The words were unexpected, but they were the ones I needed to hear. I didn't know how this would all play out, or if my father and I could ever fully mend the gap between us. But for the first time in a long while, I believed that maybe we could. "I don't expect things to change overnight," I said, my voice steady now. "But I need you to understand that you hurt me, and that it's going to take time for me to trust you again." "I understand," he replied quietly, his head bowed. "I'll wait. I'll do whatever it takes." And for the first time, I believed him. It had been a few days since I sat with my father in the living room. The silence between us hadn't lifted entirely, but there was something different in the air. My father was still distant in his way, but there was a quiet, Tentative effort to bridge the gap between us. It wasn't much, but it was something. Sean had stopped by a couple of times, mostly to check on me, but also to check on Dad. It felt strange, like we were all walking on eggshells, trying to find our footing in a world that had shifted beneath us. Sean, usually brash and loud, seemed almost too quiet, too aware of the gravity of everything. I hadn't expected him to change, but the way he looked at Dad, the way he spoke to me, it was as if the weight of what had happened was starting to press on him too. I still hadn't spoken much to my father. After our conversation, I wasn't sure what to say. The words felt too big, too heavy to come out just yet. I didn't know if I could forgive him in one fell swoop, or if it would take years. But somehow, I had started to believe that it was possible. It would take time, but it was possible. One morning, I woke up to a knock at the door. It was early, earlier than I liked. But there was something about the urgency in the knock that made me get up. When I opened the door, I saw my father standing there. His face was slightly drawn, like he hadn't been sleeping well, and there was a quiet, almost tentative look in his eyes. "Dad," I said, surprised to see him standing there. "What's going on?" He started, then paused, looking like he wasn't sure how to continue. It was the first time I'd seen him hesitate like that. He wasn't the kind of man who showed uncertainty, and seeing him like this, standing on my doorstep without his usual bravado, made something inside me shift. "I've been thinking," he finally said, his voice softer than usual. "About everything. About what I said. About what I did." I swallowed, feeling the weight of his words already. "Dad, you don't have to." "I do," he interrupted, his gaze shifting to the ground before meeting mine again. "I've been trying to make sense of it, trying to figure out why I was so angry. So wrong." I didn't say anything, just stood there, letting him speak. For the first time, he seemed truly vulnerable. It wasn't a side of him I had ever seen before, and it made me uncomfortable. But in a way, it also made me realize how much he had been carrying. "I hurt you," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "I didn't want to, but I did. I don't know if I'll ever be able to take it back. But I need you to know that I was wrong." I didn't know how I was swanned. I had waited for this moment for years, but now that it was here, I didn't have the words to match it. Instead, I stepped aside and motioned for him to come in. We didn't speak much as he sat down on the couch. The house was quiet, the only sound the occasional creak of the floorboards as we both shifted in our seats. "I've been reading," my father said, breaking the silence after a long while. "Reading things about veterans, about the way people come back from deployment, the way we change. How it's not always easy to talk about it." I looked at him, confused. "Reading what?" "Books, articles. Things I never really understood before. Things your mom would have made sense of for me." He cleared his throat, trying to regain some composure. "I never knew how much it really affected you, or how I could have helped. All I knew was how to keep pushing things down, and I thought that if I ignored it, everything would just go away." I listened to him speak, and for the first time, I saw the complexity of everything he had hidden. The man I had always thought was strong, the one who had raised me by keeping everything locked away, was unraveling before my eyes. And as much as it hurt, as much as it was difficult to process, I realized that his pain had been just as real as mine. "Dad, you don't have to fix it," I said softly, the words coming out before I could think. "I don't need you to fix anything. I just need you to see me, to understand me." He nodded, and for the first time in a long while, I saw a flicker of the man I had always wanted to see. Someone who could be honest, someone who could admit his flaws. "I'm trying," he said. "I'm trying to understand." There was no magic moment, no sudden shift where everything was healed. But in that moment, I believed that something had begun to heal between us. Slowly, painfully, it had started. And as much as I still carried the weight of everything that had happened, I knew that I could move forward, one step at a time. "You'll get there," I said, my voice steady now. "But it'll take time." "I'm okay with that," he replied quietly. And for the first time, I believed him. A week had passed since that conversation with my father. I'd expected things to change immediately, to feel the weight of the world lift off my shoulders. But it didn't happen that way. Instead, I felt like I was walking through fog. Nothing clear, nothing defined. Just that heavy sense of moving forward without knowing exactly where I was going. But something was different. My father wasn't the same, and neither was I. There were moments, small moments, when I could feel the shift between us. Like when he'd ask me how my day was going, or when he'd help me with something without me having to ask. It was awkward, yes, and tentative, but it was a start. A slow one, but a start. One evening, as I was leaving the house to grab some dinner, I got a call from Sean. I hadn't spoken to him much since Dad and I had had that conversation, but I knew things had been tense between him and Dad too. When I picked up, his voice was hesitant. "Hey, you got a minute?" he asked. "Yeah, what's up?" "You should probably come over," he said. "Dad's asking about you." I felt a lump rise in my throat. The last time Dad had tried to have a serious conversation with me, it had been a monumental moment. But this was something else. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew it would require a new level of patience from me, and for once I didn't hesitate. I agreed and headed over. When I got there, the house was quieter than usual. No sounds of the TV blaring, no clinking of dishes in the kitchen. I stepped inside, and Dad was sitting at the dining room table, papers scattered in front of him. I paused for a moment, unsure of what to do. But then he looked up, and our eyes met. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't avoiding me. His face was serious, but there was no anger in it, no resentment, just something that felt a little softer than before. "I've been reading," he said quietly, his voice rougher than usual. About veterans. About what happens when we come home." I raised an eyebrow, unsure of what this was about. "Reading? Yeah," he said, a bit awkwardly. I didn't understand, not really, but I'm trying to. Trying to understand what it was like for you, and for me. I took a step closer. I wasn't sure how to respond. This wasn't something I had expected. My father, the man who had always kept everything to himself, was suddenly opening up in ways I didn't know how to handle. I stood there, waiting for him to continue. I guess I never realized how hard it was," he said, his gaze dropping to the table. "I always thought you'd just fit back in, like everything would be normal again." I swallowed, trying to keep my emotions in check. "It wasn't that simple, Dad. It never was." He nodded slowly, like the weight of my words was sinking in. "I get it now." I didn't understand before. I didn't know how to respond to that. My father had always been a man of few words and even fewer admissions of fault. But here he was, doing both. "Thank you," I finally said, my voice soft. It wasn't just for what he had said, it was for trying. For the first time, he was trying to understand. "I don't know what's going to fix this," he continued. "But I'm here, if you'll let me." That simple sentence hung in the air, and for the first time in years, I believed it. It wasn't a miracle, it wasn't an instant fix, but it was a step, and that was all I needed right then. "You've been trying for a while now," I said, my voice steady but quiet. "I think that's enough for today." He gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. "All right." We didn't say much after that. There was no big declaration, no grand gesture. Just the quiet understanding that we were both learning how to be in the same space again. And that was more than I had ever expected from my father. As I left that evening, I felt something lighter in my chest. Not the weight of the past completely lifted, but the beginning of a shift. It would take time, I knew that. But in that moment, I could feel the possibility of something better. Something real. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But I knew that today, for the first time, I wasn't carrying the burden alone. And that meant more than anything else in the world. The days following that conversation with my father were quieter, but they weren't easy. There were still lingering questions, things left unsaid, but something had shifted between us. The tension was different now, more like a slow, tentative peace than the sharp silence we'd been living in for so long. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. A few nights later, I got a call from Sean. It wasn't unexpected, but it still made me pause. We hadn't talked much recently. He'd been caught up in his own life, and I had been trying to keep my distance, not wanting to push too much on him. But this time, when he called, I knew it was important. "Hey, you good?" he asked. "Yeah, just been figuring things out," I replied, trying to sound casual. "What's up?" "I've been talking to Dad," he said, and there was a weight to his words that I didn't quite understand. "He's trying. You know, really trying. I wasn't sure how to feel about that. I wanted to believe him, but after all these years, it was hard to trust that things could really change. I had hoped for this kind of conversation for so long, but part of me was still wary. I know, I said slowly, but I don't know if it's enough yet. I get it, Sean replied. But it's a start. He's been different. I think he's finally seeing it. Seeing you. And maybe seeing himself too. I let his words settle in. It wasn't that I didn't believe him, but it was hard to let go of the years of frustration, of feeling like I had to prove myself over and over. Like none of it had ever mattered to my father. I'll believe it when I see it, I said, though even as I spoke, I knew I was softening. Just give it a chance, okay? Sean pressed. For all of us. I think it might be the right time. I wasn't sure if it was the right time, but maybe it was. Maybe it had always been the right time, and I just hadn't been ready to face it. Yeah, maybe. The next day, I found myself driving back to my father's house. It wasn't something I'd planned, but there was a pull, an unspoken invitation from Sean that made me reconsider. As I pulled up, the house looked the same. Worn, familiar, unchanged. But as I stepped out of the car and walked up the front steps, I felt a different kind of weight. Inside, the house was quiet. There was no TV blaring, no sounds of distant conversations. Just the quiet hum of life continuing. Dad was in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner. I wasn't sure if he had been waiting for me, or if it was just coincidence, but I knew it didn't matter. What mattered was that I was here. Hey, I said as I walked in. He looked up from the counter, startled at first, but then his face softened. Hey, didn't expect you tonight. I didn't either, I said, my voice quieter than I intended. I had no idea what to say. Part of me still wasn't sure I was ready for this, but the other part of me, maybe the part that had been waiting for so long, knew this was the moment we both had to take. Dad wiped his hands on a dish towel and set it aside, his eyes searching mine. For the first time, I saw something else there. Something that wasn't just guilt or frustration. I've been thinking about what you said, he began, his voice quieter than usual. About seeing you, understanding you. And I get it now. I'm trying. I wasn't sure what to say. The words didn't come right away, but I could feel the shift. Maybe it wasn't enough yet, but it was a start. I know, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But it's going to take time, for both of us. Dad nodded slowly, as if absorbing that truth. Yeah, I know. He let the silence linger for a moment, then added, I don't expect things to be perfect. I just want to try, Jimmy. I want to make this right. There was a heaviness in his words, but this time, it didn't feel like the weight of blame or resentment. It felt like something else, something lighter, but fragile, like a chance, not just for reconciliation, but for real connection. I'm willing to try too, I said quietly, the words finally coming easier. But it's going to take time. And for the first time, I saw him nod with something that resembled understanding. It wasn't a complete healing, not by any means, but it was more than I had ever expected. For the first time, we weren't standing on opposite sides of a battlefield. We were both just trying. I'll be patient, Dad said, his voice steady but soft. If you can, I'll wait. The room felt quieter after that. The weight of everything that had been said hanging in the air. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew it was a step in the right direction. A real one, not a forced one. And as I left later that evening, walking out into the cool night air, I felt something in me shift too. It wasn't all fixed, not by a long shot. But for the first time in a long while, I felt like I wasn't carrying the past alone anymore. That maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild. Not perfectly, not quickly. But at least we were both trying, and that felt like enough for now. A few weeks later, I found myself sitting at my father's kitchen table. The room was quiet, the kind of silence that doesn't feel heavy, but still carries weight. My father sat across from me, his hands resting on the table. We had been having more conversations lately, small ones, hesitant at first but real. Conversations that hadn't been possible before. But today felt different. There was something new in the air. A small shift that I couldn't quite put into words, but I could feel it. The kitchen was the same as it had always been, worn countertops, dishes in the sink, that old refrigerator humming in the background. But it wasn't the room that had changed. It was us. The space between us had started to feel less like a wall and more like an opening. A bridge we were trying to cross together. I wasn't sure how long it would take, or what exactly we were trying to rebuild, but I knew it was happening. Slowly, gradually, but it was happening. "I've been thinking about Mom," my father said, breaking the silence. The words caught me off guard. For years, Mom had been the one to hold us all together, the one who made sense of everything. When she passed, it felt like everything fell apart, and in the years since, I had never really considered how Dad had dealt with it. He had buried it, just like he buried everything else. "I miss her," he continued, his voice soft, almost vulnerable. "I miss the way she made everything make sense. I don't know how she did it. But I see now that I never really understood her. Not the way she understood me. I didn't know how to respond." This wasn't something I had expected to hear from him. Dad wasn't the kind of man who spoke about emotions, especially not ones like this. But there it was. He was opening up, slowly, yes, but opening up nonetheless. "I didn't always show it," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "But she was the heart of this family. And I never realized how much of that heart I took for granted." I nodded, my throat tight. I didn't want to say anything that would make this moment uncomfortable, so I just let it sit there. His words had weight, and I wasn't ready to rush through them. "Not now. I've been going through some of her things," he continued, and I could see the hesitation in his eyes. "Her letters, her old notes." My heart skipped a beat. My mother had always written little notes, little messages tucked away in drawers, in pockets, in books. I had never really understood the full meaning of them when she was alive, but now, the thought of her words, her wisdom, her strength, felt like a lifeline. "I found one the other day," he said, a small, almost fragile smile tugging at his lips. "For you. She wrote it after you enlisted." He reached into the drawer beside him, pulling out an envelope. It was worn, the edges frayed, the handwriting on the outside unmistakable. It was Mom's handwriting. The sight of it brought a rush of emotion that I hadn't been expecting. He handed it to me, and for a long moment, I just stared at it. I hadn't realized how much I needed this until that very moment. The connection to her, the part of her that had always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. I opened the envelope carefully, unfolding the letter inside. Her words, written in the familiar, flowing script, felt like a whisper in the quiet room. "She to my daughter. For the day you need to remember who you are." The words hit me harder than I expected. I took a shaky breath as I continued reading. "I know your father struggles to show it, but he is proud of you. I am proud of you. You have always carried more courage than you realize. If the world forgets your worth, remember this. You don't need acceptance to be honorable. Just honesty, just kindness, just integrity." My eyes blurred with tears, and I wiped them away quickly, not wanting to let my father see the full extent of what I was feeling. But I couldn't help it. Mom had always known what I needed, even after she was gone. "You are my brave one. My steady one, my constant. With all my love, Mom." I folded the letter slowly, my hands trembling. I hadn't realized how much I had needed to hear her words again, how much I had needed her reminder. My mother had always been the steady force in our family, and even in her absence, her love still carried me. I looked up at my father, the words still echoing in my mind. "She knew," I whispered. "She knew we'd need this." He didn't answer right away. He just sat there, looking at me with something like regret, something like understanding in his eyes. "I was never the one to talk about things like this," he said quietly. "I never knew how, but I'm trying, Jimmy, I really am." I nodded, the lump in my throat making it hard to speak. I had waited so long for this, for him to just try. And now, here he was. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. "You're doing good," I said, my voice thick. "It's enough for now." We sat there in the quiet, each of us lost in our own thoughts. But for the first time in a long while, the silence between us didn't feel like a barrier. It felt like a bridge, fragile but real, something we could walk across together. And as I left his house that day, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. It wasn't a perfect resolution. It wasn't an ending. But it was a new beginning. I knew the road ahead would still have its bumps. There would still be times when I felt the weight of the past, when the hurt came rushing back. But I also knew that we were both learning to walk forward, one step at a time. And for the first time, that felt like enough.